Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Pe Vav. We continue with some more fascinating and very important stories. Shemuel Yarchina'a Asiyeh de Rabbi Hava Halash Rabbi Be'aineh. Shemuel, this is the Amorah, first generation Babylonian Amorah Shemuel. He was known as Shemuel Yarchina'a, meaning the moon watcher. He was an expert in astronomy. He was also an expert doctor, so much so that he was the physician of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was a last generation Tana, so Shemuel was a student of his, but also his doctor. And one day, Rabbi had an eye disease. Amar le im lilach sama. So Shemuel said, I will put a medication in your eye. Amar le la yachilna. But Rabbi said, no, I can't handle it. Too painful. Can't have something in my eye. Ishtar lach mishtar. Okay, I'll put something on your, above your eye. Amar le la yachilna. No, that also is too painful. I can't handle it. Hava motib le begubta de sammane tute be. But Shemuel was such a great doctor. He was able to put some medication in a tube of herbs beneath his pillow, and just by sleeping there, the herbs were able to have their effect, even being under the pillow. And he got better. Hava kamistay Rabbi lemismeche v'la hava mistaya'a mileta. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wanted to give Shemuel semicha. Shemuel is one of the greatest Amoraim, maybe second only to Rav, and yet he was not called rabbi. He never officially got semicha. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi tried to give him a semicha, but it was not successful. Something came up, it just never was able to do it. Amar le la lista'er mor. Shemuel says, don't worry, master, don't be upset. Ledidi chazili sifra d'adam rishon uchti be Shemuel yadchina'a hakim yitkere v'Rabbi la yitkere v'asud Rabbi al yadotehe. And so Shemuel says, I saw the book of Adam Arishon. This is a book that has all the generations and genealogies of the human race down into the future. And I saw already way back then it was preordained that this is the way it should be. It says in that book that Shemuel, the Yarchina'a, the expert on the moon, will be called a Chacham, but will not be called a rabbi. This book of Adam Rishon is based on the pasuk that says Zeh Sefer Toledot Adam, which literally is that the following is going to be a telling of the generations after Adam. But literally, you could read it Zeh Sefer. Here's the book. So that means there is a book that will retell the occurrences in the future generations. So it already says preordained that Shemuel be a Chacham, but will not officially be called a rabbi, will not get semicha, and that's why we don't call him Rav Shemuel, but rather just Shemuel. And also that Rabbi's eye will be healed through him, so you see, I am fulfilling my purpose. So don't worry, Rabbi, I know you tried. Rabbi ve'Rabbi Yanatan sof Mishnah ve'Rav Asher ve'Ravina sof Hora'a. It furthermore says in that book of genealogy from Adam Arishon that Rabbi, that's Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and Rabbi Natan are the end of the Mishnah, and Rav Asher and Ravina are the end of official instruction. Now this is a very important Talmud, and so it's worth looking at Rashi on these two sections to understand what they mean, because they're really foundational in understanding how the Mishnah and the Talmud came to be. So Sof Mishnah is Sof Tanaim. Tanaim literally means reciters, like in Hebrew Vishin Nantam, those who repeat things often, that will be to memorize. So they are the authors of the Mishnah, Baraitot, Tosefta, and also Midrashei Halacha. All of these were memorized, not written down, and therefore, since they are the ones that composed these traditions, and then they were set to memorizers, so they are themselves called the Tanaim. Tanaim has two meanings: the sages that composed from like 50 to 200 about, or 220, and also it means the professional memorizers in later generations that memorized that content. Now, עד ימיהן אמרו איש את דבריו בית המדרש והיו תלמידים גורסין שמועה לבדה ולא היו מסכתות סדורות וסדר וקיבץ על הסדר והם כללו האמור בדורות שלפניהם וסידרו המסכתות ואחריהם לא יוסיפו אלא מעט. So until the time of Rabbi and Rabbi Natan, each sage would deliver his own words in the Bet HaMidrash in his own formulas. And the students would memorize them, but every tradition was stand alone, and there were no collections of masechtot, and there was no fixed order for each seder. So what did Rabbi and Rabbi Natan do? Kibetz ala seder, and he gathered them all together, so it turned into Perakim and Masechtot, and he fixed that as the fixed text of memorization of the oral law, whereas beforehand, every sage, every school had their own formulations, own traditions, own order, and that way there would be one curriculum for everybody. And after that, nobody added except for a little bit. There might be some small additions after the B and the B Natan, maybe some clarifications, some edits, but that basically they were done. We know from other sources that Rabbi Akiva already began this process 2 generations before of collecting and putting things in some order, but not till the B and the B Natan. That was the end of Mishnah. So we talk about Mishnah here as the literary work of Mishnah as we have it today, but also in addition to the whole framework that they set up and the order, the structure of Sedarim and Masechtot, and that would be the basis of all study from then on. That often happens once one work is codified, so then the next generation, they can't add any more to that, so then they begin commenting on that source, which is exactly what happens. Okay, so Hora'ah, so Ravinan Rav Asher, the end, Hora'ah literally just means the end of official teaching, of instruction. So Rashi says that means Sof Kol HaAmorain. So these sages from 200 till about 500 or 600 are called Amorain from the word Amar. They're the speakers, the sayers, or really better, explainers. Right? Amora is someone who is commenting, explaining the things that are previously taught. These terms themselves come from the choreography of an official derasha, where you have the rabbi would be sitting in the middle, and next to him would be a Tana, who would be a professional reciter that would say the Mishnah or whatever Tanaitic source that they were going to analyze, and then the rabbi would explain it, but he would explain it in a low voice, while then Amora, a loudspeaker, would transmit that in a loud voice and sometimes add even more explications so that the rabbi could concentrate on the main content. Amora would then elaborate it and say it in a loud way. So in a way, the Tanaim, what we call the Tanaim, is really the professional memorizers, but also the content that they said. And Amoraim is both the loudspeakers, the conduits, and also the text of the Talmud itself was written by the sages that we call Amoraim because they are expounding, explaining, amplifying the text of the Mishnah. Ad yemehem lo hayta gemara ala seder, ela kishahayta she'ela nish'elet betam ha-mishnah bebet ha-midrash, o she'ela al ma'aseh me'ora bedin mamon, o isur ve'eter, kol echad ve'echad omer ta'amo. So until the time of Ravina Rav Asher, there was no Gemara that was fixed in a fixed order. Rather, whenever there was some question that was asked regarding a Mishnah, what does this Mishnah mean in the Bet HaMidrash? Or something happened, someone brought a chicken in, is this kosher, is it not kosher? With a law, or a civil law, a matter of monetary, or is it permitted or prohibited? So everybody would say, I think this, I think that. Everybody would give their explanations, their reasons, and their sources. And so now you had this huge collection of discussion material, but it was not fixed in any order. So Rav Asher and Ravina, they took all of this discussion that was remembered in some format, and they put each statement of the Amoraim that came before them, and they put it next to the relevant Masechet, and next to the associated with the relevant Mishnah, and La Mishnah Duriya Veshenuyala Veukshu Kushot Sheyesh Lashiv Uperukim Shirim Letares Hem V'Amoraim Sheimahem. And so they also expanded. Let's say the early Amora, Rav or Shemuel, they said a certain statement. So then they said, well, where's that statement relevant to? It's relevant to this Mishnah. Okay, we'll put it over here. And then they added questions that are worthy of asking and answers that are worthy of answering. And so they added the dialogue and discussion regarding every statement of the Amoraim, not only Ravina Rav Asher, but also the other Amoraim that were with them. וקבוע הכל בגמרא כגון אתיבה, מטיבה, ורמינהו איבעיה להו. And they set down within the Gemara all of these questions and answers. For example, when it says he asked him, etibe is one person asking one person. Metibe, they asked him. So etibe is when they have two chebrutot, two people learning together. Metibe is when the whole group of students asks the rabbi. Urminhi, when you bring two sources of equal status that contradict each other. Ibaya lehu, he asked them. And ve'atirusim shalehem, and the answers that were upon them. So Rabbi Ravina and Rav Asher, all these questions, which actually are usually anonymous. Who asked these questions? Who says etibe? Who says metibe? So Rashi says that this is all all these words were added in by Ravina and Rav Asher, who came up with all these appropriate questions and answers, kind of reconstructing the dialogue that occurred when the early Amoraim already made those statements. שאמרו לפניהם הקושות והתירוסים שלהם לא כמו בגמרא על סדר מסכתות ומשנה של סידי רבי ובאו רב אשר ורבינה וקבעום. All of the questions and the answers that are on them, everything that remained from the generations prior, and everything that was said before them, the questions and the answers were never set down in the Gemara in order of the Masechtot for this Mishnah and that Mishnah, which Rabbi had composed. And therefore Rav Asher and Ravina came and they took all that material and they set it forth. Basically, according to Rashi, you have the redaction, the editing of the Talmud happened more or less, almost all at one stage, that sixth generation of Amoraim, of Ravina and Rav Asher and their contemporaries. Basically, according to them, before that you had memorized statements of the various generations, Rav and Shemuel and Rav Huna and Rabba and Rava and Papa and so on, right, from each generation. So they memorized some fixed statements that they said, but those were not in a fixed sugya. And so they also, from previous generation, had questions and answers, but all those were also floating around and not memorized in any fixed way. And so they came and took those statements, like the final halachic statement that someone said, Shomer, Shemasar, Shomer, Chayav, for example. And then the questions, answers, they took the previous discussions on them, and then they added also, in a way, reconstructing what was a lot of the discussions that were upon them, and added those key words, the question words, the answer words. So it's really Ravina and Rav Asher that, with all that previous material, constructed the sugya as we have it. Okay, that is very important. This is Rashi's view. It's a little different from the view of the Geonim. The Geonim, like Rav Shira Gaon, most importantly in the Zigeret, he has a very important letter that he writes to the Jewish community of Kairouan in North Africa. They ask Rav Shira Gaon about all these questions. How was the Mishnah edited, and the Talmud, and who, and where, and when? And he answers with the phrase dara batar dara, generation after generation. In other words, according to the Geonim, the early generation, they had their commentary on the Mishnah. The next generation added their commentary on the first generation and on what they said about the Mishnah. And every generation after came, so that a sugya was not edited all at the end, like Rashi said, but rather it's more like a 7-layer cake, or more like an archaeological tale, where you have each generation, each layer is one upon the other, each one inserting, oh wait, I have another answer, I have another question, so that it grows internally, but there's already a skeleton beforehand. So these are two very important models. If you look at the evidence, for example, comparing the Bavli to the Yerushalmi, or very often you will find that the skeleton of the Talmud Bavli is already in an earlier form in the Yerushalmi, which means that would support the contention of the Geonim that there was an earlier version of the Sugya, and then it developed and got longer, and then later Amoraim added even more explanation, questions and answers, and dialogue, and so on, so that it gets longer and longer. So definitely examples that fit into the Geonim model, and there are also examples where there is no prior sugya, and most of the dialogue is anonymous, not from named Amoraim. So you could call it stam, meaning anonymous, and that would fit into Rashi's model, that there seemed to be just maybe one statement of an Amora, and then a whole sugya is built around that with no other named sages, so that would imply more of Rashi's model. So I think both models, you can find lots of examples of each. Lastly, when we say Sof Hora'ah, Rashi assumes that means the end of the editing of the Talmud. This, however, there are some questions on that. Number one, there are a generation or two after Ravina and Rav Asher, like Mor bar Rav Asher. So they're still even named Amoraim after Ravina and Rav Asher. So they can't be literally that they are the absolute end of the Talmud, because there are still more after them. Furthermore, there are lots of places where the Talmud says, what did Rav Asher mean by this? Or who said it? Was it Rav Asher said it, or was it someone else that said it? In other words, there seems to be a later stage of editors that are already 1 or 2 generations removed from Ravina and Rav Asher. For that reason, the Geonim say, first of all, that it's actually later sages, some of them anonymous, that are actually put together the entire Talmud. And when it says here, Sof Hora'ah, that means they were the end of authoritative rulings. So it was actually a legal status that is kind of like, once Shulchan Aruch is published, that's it. So you have to follow Shulchan Aruch. Okay, there's always, of course, commentaries and things after, but that's the end of this official status of ruling. So it was more about their legislation and their status as final deciders, rather than the editing of the Talmud. So that's very important to keep in mind as well. And in fact, while Ravina and Rav Asher certainly did a tremendous had a tremendous contribution on their layer of the Talmud, it does seem that the anonymous parts, most of them, maybe not all of them, do come from later generations, what the Geonim call Savoraim, and what others call Stamaim. Okay, anyway, this is an essential source for appreciating what the Talmud is all about and how it was put together. Okay, now we go back to the Talmud. Navasimanech ad avo el mikdeshe el avin al achritam. If you want a mnemonic to remember Ravina and Rav Asher, so remember this pasuk from Tehillim: until I entered the sanctuary of Hashem and considered their end. And so ad avo el mikdeshe. Mikdeshe sounds like Asher, and Avina sounds like Ravina, and Achritam, they are the end, right? So they are the end of this official status of ruling of the generations of the Amoraim. Sof Hora'ah. All right, and now a new story. Amar Rav Kahana. Ishta'e li Rav Chama bar Berate de Hassa. Rav Kahana says that Rav Chama, the grandson of Hassa, told him the following. Rabba bar Nachmani agav shemada nach nafshe. The Rabba bar Nachmani, that's the famous Rabba, the third generation Amora, Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Pumbedita for 22 years. He died because of persecution of the government. Here's the full story. Achalu be kursa be malka. Amru, ika had gabra bihuda'e. Tekame batel teresar alfe gabre misrael. Yarcha be kaita v'yarcha be sitva mikarga de malka. So the government literally took a bite out of him. Achalu be kursa. It's an idiom that means they accused him. They sent out an accusation and they said there is someone. They didn't know exactly who it was, but they know that there is a teacher in Judea who is causing 12,000 men in among the Jewish community to not pay their taxes during 2 months of the year, during 1 month in the summer and 1 month in the winter. What is this talking about? So Rabbah, he would hold special classes, shiurim, during the months of Elul and the month of Adar. That's when things were a bit slower on the farm and people could get away, and before the major holidays. So they came during these months to listen to shiurim. Besides all year long, of course, there would be students, full-time students studying, but during these 2 months, people that were generally farmers or other things, they would come and devote them these months to Torah study under Rabbah. Now, during these 2 months, they were not paying their normal tax, either because they weren't working, there was some kind of leniency for students, people studying and not working, that either they didn't have to pay tax or they got away with not paying the tax because they were not home. So when the tax collector came, they couldn't find them. And they said, what's going on? How come all of a sudden these 2 months our tax revenue is going down so much? Oh, it's because there's some teacher that's bringing them all in that's causing us to lose all this revenue. So, Shedaru Peristeka de Malka Batre Vela Ashkache. They sent an officer from the king to go find him, but they could not find him. Arak ve'azel mepumpedita le'akra, me'akra le'agma, me'agma le'shichin, me'shichin le'srifa, me'srifa le'ena demaim, or me'ena demaim le'pumpedita. And Rabbah knew that the government is after him, so he had to keep running away from place to place, and he went from Pumpedita to Akrat, from there to Agma, to Shichin, to Serifa, to Ena demaim, and then he came full circle back to Pumpedita. Pumpedita Ashkache, and the official found him in Pumpedita. How did he find him? Ikla peristeka de malka l'hushpiza de Rabbah. Happens to be that the officer of the king was staying in the same hotel as Rabbah. Keribu takakame vashkuhu teresar kase vedalyu letakami. Now the officer didn't know that Rabbah was staying in the same hotel just yet. But here's what happened. They put a tray in front of the messenger and he gave him 2 drinks to drink. Now, in the Talmud, things that come in pairs can be dangerous. So he drank 2 drinks, and his hadar parsufel ahore, his face turned around backwards, like his neck spun around 180, and he couldn't get back into shape. This is a big problem. Amrule, ma'inavidle. So the attendants of Rabbah says, what should we do with him? Right? We're going to leave him like this. He's going to go back home and all out of shape. They're going to say, what happened? Who did this to you? It's not going to look good for us. So Gabrat Malkahu, right? He's a king. He's a king's messenger. We can't. They're going to blame us if we leave him like this. We're going to think that they're going to say that we give him a curse or something. Amrullah Amar lehu kiribu takalekamev ashkuhu had kasa vedalyu takamikame velitase. So the boss says, I have an idea. Put another tray before him. Give him one more cup to drink and remove the tray so that he'll have 3 drinks altogether, an odd number, and then he will be healed. Abdu lehachivi taseh. They did that, and in fact he was healed. Amar medayadana de gabrak de ka ba'ena hachahu. So now the officer said, now I know for sure that the person who I'm seeking is here. Number one, because this terrible thing happened to me, must be some kind of curse or some kind of warning to me, that this is a holy man, and the fact that I got better must be someone wise here that knows how to make me better. This is too strange a coincidence. This guy's around here somewhere. Bachish abatre v'ashkache. So the officer did investigating and found Rabbah. Amar azlina meha. So the officer said, listen, I am going to leave this hotel. I'm leaving here. I'm going back to the headquarters. I miktal ketalu lahu gabra la megalena. I nigidi menagedin le megalena. And he says, listen, I'm not going to tell the government where you are, even if they kill me, right? If they threaten to kill me and they kill me, I will not reveal. However, if they beat me and they torture me, then I'm not going to be able to withstand the torture, and I'm going to tell them where you are. So listen, I appreciate your help. I think that you were behind making me better. Maybe you were behind making me sick too, but you saved my life, and therefore, if I can, I won't say where it is, but I can't promise, because if they torture me, I'm going to say something. Atyuhu lekameh. So they brought Rabbah before this officer. And they took the officer and they brought him into a small hallway, and they closed the door behind him, so he was stuck in the hallway. Rabbah prayed, and the wall crumbled and fell on him. In other words, they couldn't take any chances that he's going to go back, and they probably will torture him and then reveal where Rabbah is. So Rabbah has him killed. Now, of course, the government is going to come back and say, what happened to this officer? And so they're going to, keep looking for Rabbah. So Rabbah is on the run. Rabbah runs and hides in a swamp. He's sitting on the stump of a palm tree, and he's studying Torah alone. He's using his time well. And it happens to be that at the same time that Rabbah is there studying alone, up in the heavenly yeshiva, they were discussing a case regarding sara'at. Now, the basic law is that if the leprous sore on the skin comes first, and then a white hair emerges afterwards, then that's tameh, that is sara'at. But if the other way around, if there's a white hair first and only then comes the leprous sore, then it will be tahor. But what if it's safek? HaKadosh Baruch Hu omer tahor v'chuluhu metibta d'rikia amri tameh. If you're not sure which one came first, so there was a big machloket. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, it's okay, it's tahor. But all the other sages up in the heavenly yeshiva said, it's tameh. V'amri ma nochach. And they said, who is going to adjudicate the dispute? There's no higher authority. Okay, this is amazing on many levels. One, that Hashem does not have final say on this is the halacha, and that he's, okay, you're one opinion, but all the other sages say otherwise. This goes hand in hand with the famous story of Lot b'shamayim in heaven, they do not determine what the halacha is. Even if a bat kol, even if HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself says this is the halacha, Hashem gave the Torah to Israel and to the sages to discuss. And so Hashem has a strong opinion, but so do the other sages, and they are discussing, and they need an arbitrator, they need another opinion to come and make the final decision. So who's around that can arbitrate? Nochach Rabbah bar Nachmani damar Rabbah bar Nachmani ani yachid b'negaim ani yachid b'aholot. And so they said, Rabbah bar Nachmani, he can do it because he said, I am uniquely qualified regarding Negaim, and also I am uniquely qualified in the area of tent impurity. So because he was an expert in these areas, they said, listen, you know what, we need Rabbah to come and adjudicate. Unfortunately, that means Rabbah has to die so that he can go to the heavenly court, so that he can decide the matter. So they sent a messenger, same language as we had before of sending a messenger. It doesn't say there, it says pristika. Okay, but same idea that now a messenger is sent from heaven, again, also looking for Rabbah. So for two very different reasons. The Roman government is looking, the Persian government is looking for him because he's causing people not to pay tax, so they want to arrest him. And now the heavenly court is sending Malach HaMavet after him because they need his expertise regarding Sarat to decide this huge heavenly controversy. La hava maseh Malach HaMavet lemikravle, midela hava kapasik bepume megirseh. And just like the Persian official could not find him, and had such a hard time, also even Malach HaMavet could not come close to him because he wouldn't stop reciting Torah in his mouth. And Malach HaMavet cannot kill someone while they are studying Torah. Now, in the meantime, a wind blew, and the howling of the wind between the branches made such a noise that Sabad Gunda de Parashehu. Rabbah thought that this must be an infantry battalion coming to arrest him. Amar tenach nafshe dahu gabra v'lai maser bidad malchuta. He said, I would rather die than be given over to the hands of the government. Who knows what they're going to torture me or whatever. I'm ready to die, and Hashem should take me now if it's my time. Ki hava kanaicha nafshe amar tahor tahor. As he was dying, perhaps within that within that state, he already knew about and understood the heavenly controversy that was happening, and he had this, a near-death experience, actually a death experience. And so he was then at that point contemplating this issue regarding Sarat, and as he died, he gave his Pesach Halacha, that is Tahor. In other words, he agreed with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on this matter. Yasad bat kol v'amra ashrecha Rabbah bar Nachmani shegufecha tahor v'yatzea nishmatecha betahor. And the bat kol came out and said, happy and well is it with you, Rabbah bar Nachmani, that your body is tahor, and with your last breath, your last words were tahor. So it has a double meaning, both tahor regarding this matter of the white hair, but also that he lived his life in purity. Meanwhile, he was hiding out. Nobody knew where he was. So how would they know in the yeshiva in Pupadita that he died? So a note fell down from heaven and said that Rabbi Bar Nachmani has been summoned to the heavenly court. Literally, that's true. He was summoned, but now they got the message that he had died. So his students, Abaye and Rava, and all the rabbis went to deal with the burial. They had to go and tend to the body and bury it. But they didn't know where it was because he was hiding. So they went to the swamp. I figure that's a hiding spot that people usually go to. And they saw birds hovering over and making shade on a certain spot. So they said that must be where it is. That's good for fishermen also, right? You see the birds coming down, there's fish there. But here, for a different reason, the birds were making shade to cover over the body so that the sun wouldn't beat down on it and cause it to decay. And so he says that must be where the body is, that you have this miraculous shade. And the rabbis, they said eulogies for 3 days and 3 nights. Very appropriate, a great sage. But it was not sufficient. And another note came down from heaven and said, if you leave now, then you're going to be excommunicated. So they extended the eulogy for 7 days, and then another note came down and said, okay, now you can go home. You gave him sufficient proper honor. Hahu yomad denach nafshe dalye za'afa v'dare lehu taya'a kirachib gamla mehai gisa denahar perat v'shadye behai gisa. On the day that he died, this was such a spiritual loss in the world can cause cataclysmic natural events as well. And a hurricane came. A hurricane was so strong that it lifted this Arab merchant, itinerant merchant, while he was riding his camel, and it lifted him up from one side of the river Papa, and it dropped him down on the other side. Amad, my hai. So this merchant said, "What is this? What's going on?" Amrile nach nafshed Rabba bar Nachmani, and so someone told them, Rabba bar Nachmani, the great sage of the Jews, died. Remember, this is before Islam. There is no Islam yet. So this is just a traveling merchant. Amar lefanav, Ribono shel olam, kule alma didachu, v'Rabba bar Nachmani didach, at derabba v'Rabba didach, amaika mahrebat le'alema, nach za'afa. So even though this is a nomadic Arab merchant, but he was pretty good in his theology, and he made the following beautiful prayer. He says, Ribono shel, Master of the universe, the whole universe is yours, including Rabba bar Nachmani is also yours. You are for Rabbah, and Rabbah is to you. Like ani lidodi v'dodi li. You love Rabbah. Rabbah loves you, and so now you're still together with him. It's not like us when we have someone in this world. We're close to them. When they die, we feel their absence. But Hashem, you own everything. This world, the next world, this yeshiva, the heavenly yeshiva. So why are you destroying the whole world just because Rabbah died? So now he's together with you, right? You're still connected. So Hashem accepted this, and the storm subsided. Okay, what an amazing statement. Rabbi Ishmael, that's the end of that story. So this is the story of the death of Rabba bar Nachmani. Okay, we end with one more story following up on the fat rabbis that we had in the previous stuff. We have one more fat rabbi we have to tell a story about. Rabbi Shimon ben Halafta Baal Basar Hava. Rabbi Shimon ben Halafta was corpulent. Yoma had hava chamimale. One day he was very hot because he was so fat that it was a hot day, and he was particularly hot. Hava salik v'yatib ashina detura. So he went and sat on a mountain boulder, right up on the mountain, to cool himself off. Amar la librate. Beti, hani fi alai b'nifa vani eten lich kikarin de nerd. So he said to his daughter, please fan me with a fan, and if you do that, I will give you packages of this nice spice, spikenard, and a nice perfume. I will give you that as a gift. Adachin ashpazika amar kama kikarin de nerd lemori dichi. And just then a wind blew, and it was such a nice breeze. It was as refreshing as having bundles of spikenard. And so he said, how many packages of nerd do I owe the overseer of this wind? In other words, he's just appreciating that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's true, he makes it really hot in the summer, and he was very hot, but then this beautiful wind comes that is more refreshing, and if I had to pay for this, how much would I have to pay? So he has to pay his daughter, right, a few bundles of ned to get her to fan him, and now HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings this nice breeze to cool him off. How much would he pay for that? And so a nice meditation on appreciating the beautiful things in nature. We now return to our Mishnah that said Hakol Keminhag HaMedina, that all the deals between an employer and employees goes by the usual custom, as long as they don't say anything differently. And so if it's in a place where usually the employer will give them desserts and snacks, and that's included, then he has to provide for that. So the Mishnah adds, has an example or two, and then says this general rule: everything follows the regional custom. So the Gemara asks, Hakol latuye mai? Why does it have this general formulation, Hakol, everything? We already know the rule from the examples that it brought before. La tuye batra denihigi michrach rifta umishte anpaka. Di amar lehu kadimu v'aiti lehu amru lo kol keminach. Where it's coming to include a place where the workers come and they generally eat some bread and a quarter log of this anpaka, some kind of health shake made with asparagus and wine. If they generally eat that in the morning, then if the employer says, listen, it's not ready yet, so why don't you go out and start working and I'll prepare it and I'll bring it out to you. I'll bring it to you. So they can say, no, that's not, you cannot force us to do that. We want to have our special breakfast here before we start working, and so then the boss will have to wait until it's ready and until they eat that. So that's so not only the substance of what he has to provide for them, but even the timing and place of where he provides it for them all follows the general custom. Maaseh b'Rabban Yochanan ben Matya, shamad libno se uschor vegomer. And then after that halacha, that everything follows the regional custom, we have a story about Rabban Yochanan ben Matya. He told his son to go out and get some workers, and he told the workers that he's going to give them lunch. And then he came back and Rabban Yochanan says, you told them lunch? You couldn't possibly give them a lunch that would be good enough. Even if you fed them the meal that's fit for King Shlomo, they are the sons of Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov. Therefore, go back quickly before they start working and tell them, listen, we're just giving you the standard lunch was of bread and beans. So we ask, Maaseh listor, this seems to be a story that contradicts the law that we just said. You just said that everything follows the regional custom. And therefore, the son of Rabban Yochanan told them, I'm going to give you lunch. It should follow the regional custom. And if the custom there is just to give bread and beans, then that's all he would have to give. Why would you think that he has to give them a meal fit for a king? So it should follow the usual custom. So why did Rabban Yochanan have to go and stop them from and redo the deal before they start working? Right? Couldn't they just all follow the custom? So this story seems to be the opposite. It seems to contradict the law that we just said. And the answer is the Mishnah is missing some words that we have to add in. And here's how you should read it. Now, ironically enough, this Koren edition is missing 3 words at the end of this daf, and so we can read it from the Vilna edition that we have here. V'im pasak lehen mezonot. If the employer said, I will give you food, then riba lehen, that increases the obligation. In other words, if the employer says nothing, right, come and work, then you follow the general custom of that region, whatever it is, a small lunch, a big lunch. However, if he says, I will give you sustenance, then that's an increase, because otherwise why'd you say anything? And so once you increase it, how much is the increase? I'm going to give you lunch, and you don't specify what the lunch is. That's why the story comes to say that you have to treat any Jew like a king and give them the more than the best meal you could possibly think of. And that's impossible, so therefore, best to go back and make sure to set a limit on what you're going to give them. And then it follows with the story. Yochanan ben Matya shamad ibno se uschol lanu po'alim halach basak lehen mezonot ushba esel aviv amar lo beni afilu ata oseh lehen kisudat shlomo b'sha'ato lo yasata yidecho batchai mahen shehen bnei Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov. And then we have the story that Rabban Yochanan ben Matya told his son, go and hire some workers, and he went and said, we will give you lunch. And when they came back, he said back to his father. His father said to him, my son, even if you make them a meal like King Solomon at his height, you will not have fulfilled your legal financial obligation, because these workers, while they may be just poor day laborers, they are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov. Now we ask, Lemema de seudata de Abraham avinu adifa mi de Shlomo. Are you trying to tell me that the meal of Abraham was greater than the meal of King Solomon? In other words, they are the children of Abraham. So you'd have to give, since they're children of Abraham, giving them even a meal fit for King Solomon would not be enough. You have to give them a meal fit for Abraham. So what, Abraham's meal was greater than that of Shlomo? Let's compare. We have good descriptions of both of them. So the daily ration provisions for King Solomon's meals was 30 measures of fine flour, 60 measures of regular flour, Asara bakar beri'im, asara bakar re'i, u'me'ah son lebad, me'ayil, usbi, ve'yachmor, u'barburim, va'abusim. And 10 fattened oxen, 20 oxen that are just pasture, 100 sheep, harts, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. That's a lot of food. V'amar Gurion ben Astion mishmei derav. Halalu la'amilan shel tabachin. Rabbi Yitzchak amar halalu l'sikei kedera. And all of that flour was not even all the flour that was needed. The flour that we mentioned is only the flour that the bakers used to absorb the steam. They had well-worked dough to absorb the steam. Or Rabbi Yitzchak says that this was just for this pudding made out of meat and wine and flour that they made in a pot. That's all the flour was just for that. So besides that, they had lots more flour for all the bread and everything else that they made. ואמר רבי יצחק, 1,000 נשים היו לשלמה, כל אחת ואחת עשתה לו בביתה כך. מה טעמה? זו סיבורה שמעשליסו עד היום, וזו סיבורה שמעשליסו עד היום. And this amount that's mentioned here in this pasuk, you have to multiply that by 1,000, because Shlomo had 1,000 wives, and each one made the meal that was just described. Why so much? Because each wife said, maybe King Shlomo is going to come and eat dinner with me tonight. Maybe the other baby is going to come eat dinner with me today. Lunch, whatever meal. And so each one every day had to make this full meal just in case King Shlomo came to eat with that wife. ואילו גבי אברהם כתיב, ואלו בקר עשה אברהם ויקח בן בקר רך וטוב, ואמר רב יהודה אמר רב, בן בקר אחד רך שניים, והטוב שלושה. Now let's compare that to the meal that Abraham made for his guests. For him it says that Abraham ran to the herd and he got one calf, tender and good. Now that seems like only one animal. So there is a midrash that multiplies it into 3, because it says bakar, rach, and tov. And Rav says ben bakar, that's 1, rach, soft, tender, that's 2, and tov, that adjective comes to say 3, that he actually offered them 3 animals, but 3 cannot possibly compare to the thousands and thousands that we mentioned for Shlomo. And the answer is Hatam telata tore letlata gabre hachal lechol Yisrael Yehuda shenemar Yehuda v'Yisrael rabim kachol asher al hayam. For Abraham, he was only feeding 3 guests, so that's 1 animal per guest. That's a lot, more than anybody could eat. Whereas for King Shlomo, although yes, it was many thousands of animals, but for him, this meal was not just for Shlomo himself, but for all of his people, all of Israel and Judea, and there were many as the sand on the sea, and therefore, even though King Shlomo made a lot more food, he also fed a lot more people, and so proportionally, Abraham's meal was greater. Mai barburim abusim. Now you mentioned King Shlomo fed them fattened birds. What is that? Amarav she'obsim otam be'al korchan. This means that they are overfed, force-fed. I think it's called foie gras today. Ushmuel amar she'abusim ve'omdim me'alehem. Shmuel said, no, if they're forcefully fattened, that's not as good as that they're naturally fat. On their own accord. So they got these species that are just really fat birds. And Rabbi Yochanan says they were the highest quality animals and birds because these are oxen that never worked. And so if they work, then they become muscle, and muscle is tougher than fat. So they bring oxen that never worked and are very fatty, and they bring hens from the coop that never lay eggs, so that they are also more delicious and didn't have to work. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mubchar sheba behemot shor, Mubchar sheba afot tarnegolet. Rabbi Yochanan further said, the best type of cattle is ox, and the best type of bird is hen. Amar Amemar, Zagta ukamta be batnita de mishtakecha bene asre de la Mesia pasya kanya. Amemar says, if you have a fattened black hen that's found among the wine vats where there's lots of grape seeds, and it eats so much of the grape seeds, it gets so fat, it can hardly take a step the length of a reed, and that's how fat it is. That is the best type of hen to eat. That would be really delicious. Ve'ela bakar ras Abraham. Amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav, ben bakar echad rach shenayim v'tov shelosha, ve'em achad kedamrei nashe rakich v'tab. Now we're going to revisit that derasha of Rav, that when it says Avraham ran to the cattle and got one that was tender and good, and Rav said ben bakar, that means one, and Rach is two, and Tov is three. Why don't you say that it's only one animal? And these are all descriptions of one animal, this one animal that was tender and also it was good. As people generally say, as a common idiom, tender and good. Just because it has an and doesn't mean we're talking about two different things, right? A calf, tender and good, but it's all referring to one animal. Im ken ichtob rach tob, my vatob shma mina lidrasha. Oh, because if it just meant one animal, it could have said ben bakar rach tob, tender good. What's the extra vav? It must mean that the extra vav is to add an extra interpretation that in fact there were three. Now ema tere, maybe there was only two calves. How do you know three? Midetov lidrasha rachname lidrasha. Since we're using the word tov, since it has no vav, so that tov must be referring to another animal. Therefore, rach also must be referring to another animal, and we should not read it ben bakar rach, a tender animal, and then tov as meaning a second one. No, since tov is talking about another animal, rach also is talking about an additional animal, so we get three altogether. Mativ Rabba bar Ola, ve'etema Rav Hoshaya, ve'etema Rav Natan b'Rabbi Hoshaya, ve'eten elanad v'mehed lasot oto. Hold on, we have a challenge. From any one of these three rabbis. It says that Abraham gave the animal to the servant and he hurried to prepare it in singular. The answer is kol chad vechad yihabeh lenad chad. No, there were three animals and each of them he gave to one servant, so that simultaneously they would all be preparing them so they'd be done quickly. Vayikach chem'a v'chalab ben bakar asher asa vayiten lifnehem. Hold on, the pasuk says that Abraham took the curd and the milk and the calf, v'ben habakad. Habakad, it means only one animal. So it doesn't sound like there's only one and not three. And the answer is the kama dematya aite lekamaihu. Means each one that as it was prepared and as it got ready, he brought it before them. He didn't want them to wait. And so whichever one was ready first, he came and he brought it with the curds and the milk. And but he brought all three, in fact, one at a time. Now, why do you need three animals? Wouldn't it be sufficient to have one? There's only three people to eat an entire animal. Amar Rav Hanan bar Arava, he brought three sheep because he wanted to give each one. So he wanted to give them 3 tongues with mustard. And so if it's worth killing a whole sheep just to give each one the tongue with mustard, a special delicacy. He didn't want them to have only one person have it or have to split that tongue into 3. And so that's why he gave them 3 animals. Amar bi Tanchum bar Chanilai da Olam, al yishen adam min haminhag shareh, Moshe lamarom velo achal lechem, malachei sharet yadu lamata v'achelu lechem, v'achelu sakal da'atech elema, nir'u kemi shachlu v'shatu. A person should never change and deviate from the local custom. That's a theme we already see before, that if you don't say anything, you follow the local custom. And here also in terms of personal matters, that wherever you go, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And so Moshe, he went up to heaven and he did not eat, because up in heaven, angels don't eat, Hashem does not eat, so Moshe acted along with everybody else. Whereas angels, who generally don't eat, when they came down to earth, they ate bread, right? It says that they ate bread. Now we ask, literally, did they really eat bread? Angels, that they don't have stomachs, they don't really eat. Rather means that they made believe that they were eating and drinking. They ate a bite and whatever, they threw it under the table, but they made believe that they were eating. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Kol ma she'asa Abraham lemalachei hasharet be'asmo, asa kadosh baruch hu lebanav בעצמו. וכל מה שעשה אברהם על ידי השליח, עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא לבניו על ידי השליח. A beautiful drasha by Rav, that everything that Abraham did for the angels himself, Hashem did for his descendants also himself. Whereas anything that Abraham handed off to an agent, Hashem also gave to Abraham's descendants, but only gave them through an agent. Here are the examples. Abraham went himself to the herd to pick out the animal. And so too, Veruach nasa me'et Hashem, when Bnei Israel were hungry for meat, Hashem himself brought a wind and brought quail. And just like Abraham himself brought the curd and the milk, so too Hashem says, I will bring myself rain from heaven for you to feed you. And just like Abraham was tending to them, standing by them, meaning tending to them, waiting on the angels himself. He didn't send a messenger. So too, Hashem tells Moshe, I will be standing before you. I will be tending to you there at the rock when you strike the water to bring water for them. And just like when the angels left, Abraham personally accompanied them on the way. So too, when Bnei Israel were traveling in the desert, Hashem, out of Egypt, Hashem himself accompanied them and walked in front of them during the day. The contrast is, Abraham said, let some water be fetched. He didn't go and get the water and give it to the guest himself. He said, let it be gotten. Someone will get it. And so too, indirectly, Hashem told Moshe, you hit the rock and bring water for it, and the people will drink. Hashem didn't do it directly, but rather only through a messenger. Now, what we just said is in contrast to the following statement, where there is no distinction between all of these items, whether it was done directly or indirectly. And this midrash says on the merit of three things Abraham did. Three things were done for Bnei Israel, all equal in status. Because Abraham brought them curd and milk, so Bnei Israel got the man. Because Abraham waited upon the angels, the Bnei Israel got the cloud of glory to wait upon them. And because Abraham got them, said, let's get them some water, so Bnei Israel had the merit of the well of Miriam that was with them in the desert and provided for them. So here, the fact that Abraham said, Yukachna, let it be taken, is not seen as a second level, lower level, but rather as equal in level to the other items. Yukachna me'at mayim v'rachasu raglechem, amar Rabbi Yanai v'Rabbi Ishmael, amru lo v'chi be'arbiyim chashadtanu, shem mishtachavim la'avak raglehem, kevar yasa mimenu Ishmael. So, when Abraham tells the guest, take a little water and wash your feet. Now in Peshat, this is a nice thing when you're walking for so long out in the desert. So you want to sit down, you want to wash your feet and freshen up. But here, Rabbi Ishmael, interesting that it's Rabbi Ishmael saying this. Ishmael was a nice Jewish name before Islam came about. So Rabbi Ishmael says that the angels said back to Abraham, are you suspecting us of idolatry? Is that why you're telling us to wash our feet? Or do you think we're just some regular Arabs that we bow down to the dust on the feet, that we bow down to the earth, and you're telling us, wash off the dust? Maybe it's idolatry. You're suspecting us of being idolaters? Well, you know what's going to happen, that, you will have Ishmael as a child, and he is going to act in this manner. He's going to be an Arab that bows down and worships the earth. And so there's midah keneged midah, because Abraham wrongly suspected them of idolatry. So in the end, one of his descendants ended up practicing that very idolatry. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.